And so I can go back over to the other side and say, hey, we have this list of problems in the provider space or the payer space or the pharma space or med tech space, right? And how can we sort of help directionally point some of the things that they're working on towards those problems? It's been both very intellectually stimulating, but also satisfying when you put something out to the world that actually does solve a problem. There's no greater anxiety than when you first launch, and there's no greater feeling of satisfaction when you get the feedback that it's actually solving a problem.
And now, from San Francisco and the UCSF Rosenman Institute, the Health Technology Podcast with your host, Christine Winoto.
When I first met Dr. Matthew Lungren at our Healthcare League event in 2023, I was immediately struck by the depth of his mission. He began his academic journey as an English major, uncertain of how his passion for words and ideas would shape his professional path. A pivotal experience, volunteering at the Kosovo refugee camp, revealed that empathy, curiosity, and courage could illuminate the way forward. He discovered that knowledge, data, and human compassion could converge to transform healthcare, especially for marginalized communities. Over the years, Matt earned his MD and MPH, practiced as an interventional radiologist, and emerged as a leader in medical AI at Stanford, where he directed the Standard Center for Artificial Intelligence in Medicine and Imaging. His scientific work has led to more than 200 publications, including research on multimodal data fusion models for healthcare application and new computer vision and natural language processing approaches for healthcare-specific domains. He extended his impact beyond academia by teaching thousands through his Stanford Coursera course, advising startups and Fortune 500 companies, and advancing clinical AI at Amazon. Today, as Chief Scientific Officer for Microsoft Health and Life Sciences, he focuses on translating cutting-edge technology, including generative AI and cloud services, into innovative healthcare application. Also, he maintains a part-time clinical practice here at UCSF and holds an adjunct professorship at Stanford University, reflecting his ongoing commitment to both clinical practice and academic apprenticeship. In this episode, Matt shares his perspective on blending data-driven innovation with genuine human connection. He offers a vision of healthcare that encourages lifelong learning, open collaboration, and inclusive technology, ensuring that breakthroughs are not confined to a few elite centers, but rippled outward to benefit everyone. Welcome, Matt. Thanks for joining today.
Thanks for having me.
It's so nice to have you. I've been meaning to ask you to join our podcast, and it's finally the day come. And I always like to start my first question always about your story, how you get where you are today, and what, were you surprised by where you are today as well?
I am surprised when I don't think about it often, but yeah, I mean, I certainly could go back to my medical school admissions essay, and I doubt it would say any of the things that I'm doing now, which I guess is part of the fun of the adventure. Healthcare is such a diverse specialty background, education, and you get exposed to so much of the world in various ways, right? And my story, I started out as an English major, actually, believe it or not, was not a big science or math guy, and was planning to be an English professor and a writer. Through a series of events, found myself as a volunteer in a Kosovar refugee camp in Siak, Albania, back in 1999, during the conflict there. And I worked it was an abandoned bread factory that they had secured for the refugees, and we had about 350 at our peak that had come across the border, and mainly just kind of managing the supplies and donations, and then there's this bus that would come by like every week, and it was the volunteer physicians that would sort of go to different camps in the area, and they were from all different backgrounds, all different countries. They kind of worked. Obviously, the most famous is probably Doctors Without Borders. People have heard of that group, but there's every type of organization, and frankly, just volunteer docs. And And so every week they would come by, and I was sort of tasked with organizing the medical supply donations in this tiny little closet in the back of the camp, and it was kind of the makeshift clinic. And so the patients would line up, the people that had medical needs, and I'd sit there and watch the doctor work, and look for the supplies, try to organize them. And I kind of got to know some of the docs, and it was just an amazing moment for me. I just kind of realized, like, was I spending my time back home and in my my privilege to be educated and go to college, was I spending that in the best way? And so I kind of came back. Believe it or not, my grades weren't great either. And I came back and I said, I really want to do this. Like, I felt like this completely different thing had happened to me, just transformed me. So came back, kind of abandoned the future career as a barista / writer / English major, and started trying to figure out how I could make it to med school. Right. It was kind of a big uphill battle for me because, again, grades weren't great. I didn't have a science background, but, just kind of went right at it. And, eventually, ended up in med school, and kind of went through this, a similar kind of feeling during med school. I was really focused on global health, public health. Right. And I kept finding that the medical system really just wasn't set up in a way to really address some of the biggest problems. Right. It was very reactive, as we all probably heard millions of times. And it always bothered me. And, so I focused, I started doing some research with some folks in the public health school, eventually got a public health degree at the time. And I just kept seeing this disconnect between the way we care for patients in at least our healthcare system, and then sort of the actual needs of the patient. And then there's a gap there. And and so I started doing some public health research, leveraging medical images as sort of a source of truth, as opposed to diagnosis codes, which, as you can imagine, or maybe you know, is not very accurate, right? We just kind of slap these diagnosis codes that sort of fit the problem, but not totally. And there's a lot more information in the medical imaging data and pathology data and genomic data, et cetera. So really focused on that. But early on, my work was very manual. Like, you had to take these super large data sets. You had to, pull all this different disparate data types together. You had to generate cohorts and ultimately label and just to get basic insights. And kind of did that throughout my later parts of med school and residency, and then I got my first faculty job at Stanford, and ran across this whole computer science thing, right, which is sort of like a way to automate and maybe derive even more insights than humans can from data. And that was kind of another big turn in my career when I realized there's a huge amount of opportunity. Tons of things were going on at the time. It was right around 2013, 2014. So ImageNet, deep learning was really kind of experiencing another boom. And so I said, let's start taking the techniques that are, breaking, benchmarks and breaking new ground in the general computer science space, and let's see how we can apply it to medicine, and kind of merge this idea of public health driving new insights at a population level, but using some of the advanced computer science techniques to do so. So that's kind of how that winding path kind of tied a lot of things together for me. And then eventually I did the academic thing, got grants, papers, all that good stuff, had a wonderful lab, really enjoyed teaching. But eventually earned a sabbatical, as you do in academics, and spent that with Microsoft, which is my first sort of, I'd collaborated obviously with big tech, and, some of my students had built some pretty successful startups over the years, but I hadn't personally really thought about it. And again, just kind of like these random things that happen in life, where I kind of did the sabbatical and recognized, at least what was surprising to me maybe, was that I saw myself, or my core identity was a physician at this point, like, machine learning researcher, healthcare researcher. And I didn't really see how those skill sets were the same or even needed in sort of a big tech world. And it only took me a few weeks to realize that a lot of the things I'd done, right, that we all do in academics, we we communicate effectively, we boil down complex ideas, we apply them to real world problems. We look for the cutting edge where the gaps are, how we can fill them, and we lead large teams, right? We all have experience doing that, and so I started to see that overlap, and then in addition to that, the ability to scale, right? I mean, Stanford obviously is an amazing institution, and but ultimately the reach of a large technology company was hard to resist. So I ended up joining full time at Microsoft, where I'm now the chief data science officer, and I'm living out my dream. I mean, it's all the experiences I think I've had ever since undergrad have all kind of come into play, and it's really come together for me in an amazing way. So yeah, that's I'm focused now on multimodal healthcare AI and distributing the most cutting edge technology in a way that allows the rest of the world to participate.
I feel like, listening to your story, you mentioned that you're living your dream now. I feel like you always live your dream. And it's like you want to be an English professor, you study English, and somehow you want to check out this place in Albania. And you just go, you jump in and you go. And then, I mean, I guess my question is like, what are the things that, it seems almost like you're fearless about it. It's like, I'm just going to give it a try.
Yes, I think my tolerance for risk is different maybe than a lot of people, but it's not that I wasn't fearful though. I mean, my internal emotions were absolutely, I was terrified. Was this the right decision? Am I doing this? Why do I think I can do this? That, all those moments of self-doubt, I'm guilty of all that. But yeah, I think part of it was just, I think it was, I had failed on lots of things, right? I'd failed classes, I'd failed at relationships, I'd failed at careers. I've had, every kind of, entry-level job you can imagine. Never was really good at much of them. And I guess I just got to the point where I always had faith that there was something else, like that, if I take that step and it doesn't work out, it's okay, and I know that there's a lot of, it's really popular now, I think, to this idea of fail fast. Like obviously it's that big Silicon Valley thing. It really wasn't that common to talk about that. I'm dating myself now, but in the 90s and early 2000s, we weren't talking a lot about failing fast. At least it wasn't the popular vernacular. And the idea of like, oh, I never lose, I just learn, that kind of a thing. That I think is a great message, and I wish I'd had that at the time because it would have helped me probably be less fearful or have doubt. But ultimately, that is the answer. You just have to trust yourself and recognize that inaction is an action. And for me, that I think that's probably the thing that's motivated me the most is sitting still is a form of action. It just may not be the right one.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that I like when I tell this to my kid a lot is that owning your mistake is a great thing because it means you've done something, and don't let other people take your mistakes because it's yours to keep.
I like that.
And we always afraid to own the mistake, thinking that is a bad thing. And one of the things that you mentioned, now that you're in a corporate, you have this identity that you think that we are oftentimes is down by what we think our identity is. And how do you overcome that sometimes to see like, hey, we're not what we think we are sometimes?
Yeah, traveling I think helped me a lot, and I think medicine kind of is a strange form of travel, like where you're interacting with people from every walk of life and every background. And, you get the chance to learn about them too, right? As you take care of them. I found that, the idea that what you do is who you are seems like a very Western construct, right? It's hard to break that out of our patterns of behavior and thought. I got out of that pretty early. In fact, I actually, it's almost like a Gen X-ish rebellion against it. I really resented being identified by just my job, and I didn't want that to constrain me, like just because I maybe I'm going to medical school. Does that mean I always have to practice in this particular specialty for the rest of my life? And I kind of chafe at that. Like, again, not that I don't enjoy practicing, and I still do, and it's still a big part of my life and frankly my identity, but it's just not that something that I feel like it doesn't control what I do next.
Yeah, I think I think that is very 1950 when people stay in one job forever. I think like you're a doctor, that's your doctor, and if you do something else, then you kind of, I don't know, violate your oath or something. I like what you're saying is and how do you make your life richer? That means you can do a lot of different things, experience different things, just rather than just doing one thing. You mentioned about now that you're in a corporate, but you're still in academia in some sense. And what are the things that you feel is so different that you bring from academia to the corporate, but also from the corporate that you bring to academia?
Yeah. Yeah. There are moments of like feeling like you have a foot in two different places that are very different. But I mentioned some of the similarities. I think that the differences are at least that I kind of find myself being very data driven. And like if I hear statements or people pushing towards a certain direction, I really feel like there needs to be some evidence, some work done to make sure that, that whatever statement that you're making is correct, or the decision to do X, Y, Z is correct. And, that it probably is that's hard to break out of in terms of a pattern of behavior, the academic part of me. And at the same time, I think that also leads to exploration, because I guess it's not doing data for like, oh, I need numbers to back up a decision. For me, it's more, I need data to see where the gaps are, and maybe that'll inform the next direction and the next direction. And that's what I've always found valuable about, the research, the academic mindset. I think the corporate mindset, though, bringing that over to academia, I've noticed that it is easy to spend time on things that maybe aren't high impact. And one thing I really like about, some of the work I've done now the last few years in corporate is that if something isn't going to have impact, it really isn't going to rise to the level of, we're going to fund this, we're going to go forward with this. And I think there's something really elegant about that. Sometimes it's in English, taking it back to my English major, there's this saying called kill your darlings, if you've heard of that before, where you can fall in love with your own thing and even to the detriment of the broader success of whatever that thing is. And in English, right, you fall in love with maybe a few lines that you've written or a story that's just not working, and you can't let it go, right? So the good editors will tell you to kill it, right? And you'll be better for it, often even in a full rewrite. And I think that there's a very much a corporate culture that demands that, right, to be successful in a very competitive space that does not give you many chances. I think that's a really important vibe. I think that maybe I would have liked to have had. I've definitely continued projects way too long in academia. I worked on things that I probably should have known better, right? But I fell in love with the project, right?
Yeah. But I think it's both pro and con. And I think also being in a corporate, there's other people who make that decision for you. When you're in academia, I was like, well, I can hold on to it. Nobody can tell me what I should or should not do. That's
actually really good insight too. Like you are kind of your own CEO. In fact, there's two places where, as an academic physician, you're kind of your own quote unquote CEO of your own world in a couple ways, right? In terms of how you practice, obviously, as long as it's within the guidelines of best, standard of care, but also in academia, right? You can work on what you want. I mean, obviously there's a bit of the grant funding component that kind of tends to push you one direction or the other, but you're exactly right. And in corporate, you ultimately do not control, unless you are the CEO, but even still, you're answering shareholders and boards, and right. So there is that, which I think where I have seen academics struggle is not being able to take critical feedback and think critically about changing direction based on that feedback. I find that's a hard thing to learn to do. Coming from you're the CEO world. Yeah.
Yeah. I think not just academia, I think in general, everybody is not easy to take critical feedback. It's I always hear this, people, wherever you go, you always hear like how to give feedback, but not that many people tell you how to receive feedback. And I think I wish that is being taught more, I think.
There's a lot of things that I've noticed. I've worked with great leaders in all walks of life, and there is something to some of the traditional airport bookstore kind of superficial guidance and sayings, but there is this. I have a much deeper respect for great leaders than I have maybe ever before in the world that I'm in now, because ultimately it's intuition, it's feel. There just are decisions that you just need to make with very little information very quickly, that will ultimately have a massive impact, right? And in the plodding kind of slow, methodical way of doing things, which is certainly more comfortable for me, right? From the academic background, I think watching people do it well, it's just like watching a great piano player or just a virtuoso. Just you can see that there's a next level, right, to some of the the classical guidance of this is how you do X or Y, and I wish there was a way to bottle that up. And I haven't found anyone who's done that quite well, except for just trying to watch and emulate.
Yeah, and then practice too, I think.
Practice.
It's speaking of now your current role, tell us more, like, what does a chief data science officer do at Microsoft?
Yeah, it's kind of a custom role. It's not necessarily there was a JD and I applied to the JD. So there was a bit of the ability to kind of customize it to, align with the needs of the company, but also where, my interests and skills were. And yeah, so so Microsoft's huge companies, and they have a very well-respected branch called Microsoft Research, a very large organization that explores all aspects of science, right? And one of those areas is healthcare, and so I kind of spend a lot of time there learning from them, kind of exploring different use cases, and but I sit in the engineering product org, and what's really cool about this connection is that on the one hand, I can bring new insights, new capabilities, new discoveries right into the product roadmap, and think about, well, what would we need to build if this turns out to be successful, or this use case works, or this technique works for this use case. And then on the other hand, my responsibilities are to really run a team of data scientists, product managers, in delivering things that actually solve problems. And so I can go back over to the other side and say, hey, we have this list of problems, and the provider space, or the payer space, or the pharma space, or med tech space, right? And how can we sort of help directionally point some of the things that they're working on towards those problems? And it's this really cool dialogue that kind of occurs through the group that I lead now, and it's been both very intellectually stimulating, but also satisfying when you put something out to the world that actually does solve a problem. There's no greater anxiety than when you first launch, and there's no greater feeling of satisfaction when you get the feedback that it's actually solving a problem.
Can you share with us some of your examples that you hear from the provider side, that this is something that's a need, and then your product team come up with the solution?
Yeah, I mean, I can come up with there's obviously an example that I think folks are really familiar with now, which is and this wasn't under my leadership, but the idea of the ambient note generation is probably the most popularized kind of example. So, where that started was, physicians are increasingly doing more and more work in their day-to-day life. It's administrative work. It's not necessarily patient care. And that's a source of burnout, source of frustration, et cetera, for the physicians. And, there have been a lot of, attempts to sort of streamline that with voice to text type technologies and to various levels of success. But what was interesting is, ultimately you want a scribe. You want someone that can actually, listen to the conversation with the patient and draft a note that the physician can ultimately review quickly without having to, deal with the blank page problem. And And there's a lot of different techniques you could take to address that. And when generative AI, kind of made its appearance just a few years ago, there's an opportunity there to take a pain point that we knew very well. We had tried many different technological approaches to it, some of which were massively inefficient, but still raised the bar, believe it or not, because it was so low. And so being able to integrate that, but understand the problem space, understand your product market fit, essentially, right? But be able to use the technology for that purpose. And I can't say that there's been a more successful healthcare technology in a long time. And the kinds of feedback that I hear every day, from users that have experienced the product, it sounds like such a small and simple problem. Like, oh, I'll just put generative AI in the room, it'll turn a transcript into a note. What's so hard about that? And that's actually the difference between, to me, like showing some metrics and benchmarks, publishing a paper, which I obviously would have been satisfied with in a former life, and then to say, well, every little edge case is likely to come up when you launch something at scale. And that difference between, let's just say, 92% good and state of the art versus the 99% that you need to actually achieve, a satisfied user. And so that gap is probably one of the most interesting spaces right now. And so, like, when you think about, this problem, I'm going to solve it, I got my benchmark, I'm done. That's actually when the work starts. And being a part of it. So we have new initiatives that are coming, that are related to my team, and we're really focused on, well, what's the next thing? And we kind of have this thesis that medicine is not just in text, right? And I think most people would agree. And how do we interact with medical data in a way that advances the practice of medicine, but also can take advantage of some of the cutting edge, tools that are coming out of the research space. And that's really where we're focused. So multimodal medical AI, you're going to hear a lot more about that this fall, and that's where our team tends to play, which is to say, what can we do with some of these new generative agents, some of the capabilities of looking at multiple modalities, and what does that enable, both at a local use case level, but maybe even at a population level. Yeah.
So in terms of, if I were a physician, how is that benefiting me and for patient too?
Yeah. I mean, just think about, like, what do you ultimately know about your patient, and a lot of times you maybe are pressed for time. You might review the prior summary, you might review a few documents, but are you really getting across an insight across the different data that you might have, right? So you have maybe data for your wearables, maybe you've had imaging studies done, pathology studies done, you may have had your genome sequenced. How does all that relate together? It's not intuitive, and the insights that you can draw across those different modalities maybe aren't even possible with just a single human kind of trying to review it and look through it, right? There's just so many things there's so much signal in there that ends up being uncovered. And so trying to uncover that signal in a way that helps folks do better preventative care, helps people, do better drug matching, finds the appropriate clinical trials. Those kinds of use cases are just powerful. And it really requires a more rich understanding of our patients. And that comes from multimodal data.
I think also it helps the physician to connect more dots that otherwise they would not have been able to.
That's right. Dot connecting is an incredibly useful thing in healthcare.
Yeah, I think in life too.
Yes, in life as well. Yes, and you're an expert at that, as I well, no one's better at connecting dots than you.
I think it's I always like you mentioned earlier about the leadership, it seems that they move with their instinct, but throughout their life they've been collecting a lot of dots, and they know how to connect the dots. The dots are closer to one another, so become more longitudinal. Then they can make a better decision. But from outside, it feels like they just do it based on instinct.
Yeah, that's an interesting insight. I think that's probably right. I think there's just a connectivity, a network, almost connectivity that great leaders are tapped into in a way that they can see, hey, this would actually work with this, or this person's project actually has a lot of overlap with this one in different ways. Like, to some extent, that's kind of what I end up doing too, right? To connecting. There's a researcher that found a way to do X. Well, geez, that's a problem that we have way over in the other part of the company, trying to solve this in a product, and it is very satisfying when the docs connect correctly. Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, just from this conversation, making me think, like, when you're 5 years old, your dot is so limited, so it becomes so few to connect with. And as you get older, so basically in life, all we need to do is keep collecting all these dots.
I love it. This might be the extroverts' rallying cry.
So, last question before, hopefully it's my last. Usually I do last and then last. You mentioned earlier about your identity. And obviously there's some identity that you kind of limit you. You mentioned a lot. But what are some of your identity that actually help you move forward?
To some extent, I think deep down in this like core is this idea of a physician. I think that there's that experience, that kind of trial by fire, what it requires to do the 4 years of medical school and 5+ years of a postgraduate training. It gets seared into you, right? And it does color how you think about everything. But I think the corollary to that, I think there's lots of different career paths. I think I've met folks in the military, or folks that are very regimented kind of sort of training to get you up to speed in different career fields, and that stays with the way the patterns of behavior that they learn through that training stick with them. But even as a parent too, I mean, that's another thing that's kind of core down there, and it changes fundamentally how you interact with the world for the rest of your life. And so there's these things that kind of have become like, again, that's seared into you, right? That color most of your decision making or how you think about the world. But I think what propels me forward though is staying really, really close to the impact, like not worrying about some of the things like status or titles or is this going to move me a little bit further down? But if I choose to do this thing, does it actually have the most possible impact? And it might be something as simple as open sourcing a model, right? Or choosing to write an op-ed, or whatever those small little things we do that may not, it's not starting a big company, right? It's not creating the next Facebook, but every little chance you have to get in kind of a multiple on your effort for impact, I think is worth taking a look at. And that's kind of guided me to this point. So
yeah, it's like when you're saying that, it reminds me of something that I read recently that says climb mountains not because so that you can be seen, but climb mountains so that you can see the wall. Kind of like what you're doing.
How about that?
Again, now everybody's you're deep in all of this AI. Everybody love it, scared of it. I think both feeling at the same times. As a human being, as a parents, what are the things that we need to prepare and be scared of or not be scared of?
Yeah, I mean, obviously in the last few years, things have changed just almost overnight. It's so funny. It's sometimes in the talks that I do, I kind of try to put things back in perspective. And, I use this example of a kind of a textbook that was written about AI in 2021. And there's a table in there that talks about things like, writing a story, reading a story, and understanding, like, providing a interpretation of the story, creating images, looking at images, all these things that were listed off in this table that were under the category of nowhere near solved in AI. And there's this caption at the bottom that says, at present, we have no idea how to get computers to do these things. And this was, written by a very famous computer scientist in 2021. And literally, it was basically less than a year later, one model in one demo did all of those things. And you talk to audiences now, and it's like they shrug their shoulders like at the idea that we have models that anyone can access today from the internet that can do some of those things that were essentially impossible. It puts it in perspective. We are in a very, very different time, and I think that part of the anxiety or the hype or the pushback and some of the sort of the larger discussions, I don't think it changes the fact that we have unlocked a technology that will empower everybody on the planet in some way or another, and how we choose to use it, how we choose to deliver it, how we choose to accelerate some of the things that we know would benefit society. I think that's the more important discussion to me than like, oh, this model is like 2 points better than this model, and quibble over some of those kinds of things. And in terms of like the fear versus job replacement, all these kinds of other discussions, I ultimately think that it's kind of gotten overblown to some extent. I don't disagree with the fact that things are going to change across all of our lives, and I'm on the side of thinking it will for the better. But the change is great. Like there's a lot of things about the things that we do in our day-to-day lives and the work that we do. Just like when you take all the way back to the physician who has to write notes in the evenings because they couldn't do it while they were talking to their patient. That is changing their entire, literally their personal lives even, but certainly their professional lives. And it's just a small sample. Like everyone's got a something like that in their day-to-day work. Like there's something that is like really aggravating. It doesn't require all their brain power. Can these models, do some of that? And I just keep finding situations where they can. And ultimately, to me, that leads to a net positive.
Yeah, I think with or without AI, things has been changing all the time. And I think, Austin, this is something new that everybody feel like, oh my God, this is going to change. But every day, things change. It's just, we turn out okay. We've been in the world for many, many, many years. I think we will hopefully, it's my optimism of me. It's like, we all figure it out.
I share your optimism. I really do. And there is so much work to be done. And there's so many jobs that have yet to be discovered that are going to be needed to take us to the next thing. Right. And so I'm looking forward to those coming up.
Yeah. And I think it's an exciting time. I think I look at it as like, if many more people can be empowered by it, there's more people can be better and improve in whatever their well-being is. So with that, I think I'm running out of time, and thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me, Christine. Great to be here.
Thank you for tuning into today's episode of the Health Technology Podcast. We hope you found the conversation insightful and inspiring. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback helps us continue bringing you the latest in health innovation. Stay connected with us on LinkedIn and Twitter for updates on upcoming episodes and more. Until next time, keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible in healthcare. I'm Christine Minotto, and thank you for listening.